we would like to welcome our guests, Mr. Yusuf Al-Bunayyan, Chair of the KSA B20 Group, Dr. Abdul Wahab Al-Sadoun, who is the KSA B20 Sherpa, Mr. Rayyan Al-Faiz, who is the KSA B20 Finance and Infrastructure Team Leader, Ms. Rania Nashar, KSA B20 Chair of the Women in Business Council. Welcome. I would like to start with Mr. Yusuf Al-Bunayyan. Could you please tell us about the B20 Group? What are the objectives and main strategic principles that the group has identified? At the beginning, I would like to express my appreciation to everyone who has worked on this event, especially the Ministry of Finance, who have made this opportunity possible for us to all raise awareness with regards to the role that the B20 plays not only at the local regional level but also at the global level. I would also like to welcome our guests in our virtual meeting. Maybe we could start with focusing and shedding some light on what the role of the G20 is. Of course, the G20 represent a large percentage of the global economy and around 75% of the world's trade, in addition to more than 70% of the world's population. In addition, the G20 group the G20 is considered the main forum, main global forum for different financial and economic issues, and it has become a key player in alleviating many of the global issues. The G20 groups regularly have different meetings with partners such as the IMF, the World Bank, the World Trade Organization, among others. In addition, of course, to the World Labour Organization and the United Nations. The G20 is very keen on working and having a clear way of taking different points of view into consideration with regards to global issues. And from that, the connectivity groups were born, and of course one of them is the B20 Group. Of course, the business group is considered the main pillar of, or the main representative of the business sector within the G20. It is considered a link in order to activate the role of the business sector through synchronizing and connecting between the public and private sector and helping them both do all they can in order to support each other. So it helps the private sector support the public sector and vice versa. The B20's goals include producing or issuing recommendations. These recommendations must be clear and concise policies that are attainable and applicable. And the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia truly is considered a special country because it is the first country that, or it is the only Arabic and Islamic country that is a part of the G20 group, which means that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia plays a very important role, and that is why we can see how important its contributions are towards the G20 group, and specifically, of course, with regards to hosting the G20 summit. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is very keen that the B20 has productive results that are beneficial for everyone, and it is very important to provide all players with key opportunities in different sectors such as the educational, technological, and others, with the goal of providing clear recommendations and policies. Since the beginning of Saudi Arabia's presidency of the G20 group, they have gathered different opinions from different players, both local and global. These players are not only necessarily partners within the G20 member countries, but they are also keen on having an inclusive policy and taking everybody's opinion into consideration. Of course, there were a number of groups that were established in order to help the B20 achieve its goals, such as the Women in Business Council, the Finance and Infrastructure Group, and we know how excellent Ms. Rania Nashar is in leading the Women in Business Council. Of course, all of the working groups work under the umbrella of the business group, and they have a key role in producing different policies that will be presented to the leaders hopefully in November. Of course, before we move to our next pillar, we must shed some light that the B20, represented by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, has focused on a number of key principles in order to shed the light on the importance of the small and medium enterprises, in addition to the sustainable development goals that the United Nations has approved of. Thank you. I ask Dr. Abdul Wahab Al-Sadoun, could you please tell us some more about the strategic objectives, principles, and the methodology used in determining the priorities of the group's work, in light of which the working teams were formed in order to represent the kingdom? And does the B20 include members from countries not represented within the G20 member states? I would like to once again express my appreciation for all of the brothers and sisters that have worked on this summit, and I would like to say that the G20... Let me just give you some historical context for the G20. Of course, the G20 group is essentially the brainchild of the G5, previous G5 group, and then the G7 group. And a number of years ago, there were a number of finance ministers, and as Mr. Yusuf said, these meetings had an emphasis on economic issues. And in 1999, maybe we could remember, there was an Asian financial crisis, and there was an immediate need to review the effects of this crisis through the cooperation of different finance ministers and central bank governors. After that, after the 2008 global financial crisis, it became clear that more economies should play a role and in alleviating the world's financial issues. And King Abdullah honored the first meeting, and after that, in the following years, King Salman participated in meetings, and now, of course, His Royal Highness Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman has played a very effective and vital role in the last two meetings, and this shows just how important it is to have active participation, and that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is able to display its role that it can play. And the methodology that we have used in order to determine the group's objectives, they reflect the objectives that the G20 has issued, and which include preserving our Earth and the other two goals as well. These are the three goals that we all know that the G20 has issued. Based upon these three goals, we developed our methodology. Our methodology is based on three main pillars. Number one is inclusiveness, and having an open and cooperative society where we can include all organizations, regardless of their size, whether they are small, medium, or large, in addition to, of course, all of the countries where the entire world can be represented, regardless of whether the country is part of the G20 or not. And number three, of course, issuing applicable realistic policies. The third pillar emphasizes that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia should have an everlasting effect on the work of the G20 group. The goals that we have identified, frankly, they reflect the agenda of the international business community. We studied all of the concluding statements of past meetings in addition to the main themes of those past meetings. In addition, we studied the main goals that the G20 group has identified, and of course we had our own study and poll that we sent to our team members. We presented them with a number of topics, and based upon the results we prioritized our goals, and we have created 6 working teams in addition to a Women in Business Council. And I would just like to emphasize that in all of these 6 teams there are main goals in addition to the goals that they specialize in, such as digitization and others. There, of course, is a common goal between all of these working groups, which are the small and medium-sized enterprises and entrepreneurship. The second common goal is, of course, the Sustainable Development Goals that the United Nations has identified. And upon seeing these priorities based upon the polls and studies, we were able to create and include a number of very special individuals to contribute towards these teams. Of course, one of them is Miss Rania Nashar. We have 48, around 48 different individuals from the G20 countries that contribute to our working teams, in addition to 3 members from outside, from countries that are not represented or are not part of the G20 group. And I believe that what helped us truly was having an executive committee that included 18 of the most successful businessmen and women in Saudi Arabia that play a consultative role in this committee. And the important thing that I would like to shed some light on is the percentage of women within our working groups. 3 of our working groups are led by business women, i.e. it is a 43%, women represent 43% of the leaders of working teams, which we take great pride in. This high rate of participation reflects our emphasis on the role of women and the contributions that they can present towards leading these teams. The mechanism that we adopted towards our selections, of course, we had a great number of people that were taken into consideration. And we chose our final batch based on a clear and transparent methodology. This methodology depends on a number of factors. Number 1, of course, past participations and experience. Number 2, having 1 representative for every company or organization in every working group, and 2 people from every company. And experience was taken into consideration as a very important factor. In addition, we took into consideration efficiency, which is very important to us. We received a number of nominations, of course, from different organizations, and the number of Saudi individuals, or the percentage that Saudi individuals represent within the working teams are 26%, and of course the average participation rate of nationals is between 20 and 30%. So we have a high number of Saudi individuals that truly have special contributions towards the team's work. And I would also like to shed some light and utilize this opportunity to just say that in the past years, the Saudi participation was less than 1% in all previous courses. And I wish that after this period, we can have we can have a higher rate of Saudi participation from businessmen and women that could contribute towards the goals of the G20. Thank you very much. After we have been introduced to the background and objectives, I would like to invite our guests, please, to watch this short film, after which we shall return. Welcome back. After this short break, we return to begin our discussion with Ms. Rania Nashar. Ms. Rania, I would like to ask you, please, what was the purpose of creating the Women in Business Council? When was it established, and who are the members of this council? Yes. Thank you very much for providing this opportunity to discuss a vital topic which I take highly into consideration: the role of women in contributing towards solving financial and economic issues. The B20 Group, as Mr. Yusuf mentioned, is led under the presidency of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia this year. And it is very important for us to have women as leaders in the working groups. And so the Women in Business Council is this is the first time that any G20 meeting has created a working unit that specializes in the women's issues in the business sector. And this initiative comes from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the G20 Group. This initiative and this council take highly into consideration equality and empowering women in the business sector, and in turn, of course, if we achieve the first goal, then we can also provide more opportunities for women to obtain leadership positions and earn leadership positions at the global level. As Mr. Yusuf said, women represent 43% of the overall number of participants in the working groups, and we all know how important empowering women and youth is to the G20 Group. The Women in Business Council is proof of how important women's issues in business are. Everybody knows that there are many different social and economic dimensions that we at the Women in Business Council aim, in cooperation, of course, with our partners. We aim to empower women, advance their professional lives, produce policies that aim to solve the challenges that women in business face, and of course in turn empowering women to earn leadership positions in the business sector as well. We believe that women deserve equal opportunities in recruitment, and we do not want we want equality for women in the business sector, because increasing the participation of women in the business sector leads in turn to more innovation, more productivity for companies, which in turn, of course, leads to increased profit and a better economy in general. And that is why we at the Women in Business Council aim to put forth policies that aim to accelerate different economic policies. The Women in Business Council is represented by 55 members, 8 of whom are participating leaders. These leaders have been chosen based upon having past experiences in empowering women and increasing their economic participation rate. And I would just like to shed some light on that. 53% of the Women in Business Council are from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and the rest are from all of the other countries combined, whether they are members of the G20 or not. And more than 50% of the Women in Business Council are also members in other working teams in the B20 Group, which emphasizes and ensures that the vision with regards to all of the policies is complementary to what the Women in Business Council produce. And this is, in short, what the Women in Business Council does and some of their objectives as well. Thank you. Mr. Rayyan, could you please tell us about the Finance and Infrastructure team? This team was established in last March as an initiative towards alleviating the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. We noticed that could you please tell us a little bit about the recommendations and what are some of the general traits of the recommendations that the team has issued? In the name of Allah, I would like to express my appreciation to Mr. Mahmoud and all of the brothers and sisters that have worked on creating this meeting here today, and we are at the B20 are very keen on cooperating and connecting with all of the stakeholders and displaying what we work on as part of the B20 group. As you said, sir, we were established early in this year in order to produce a number of recommendations and mechanisms, and of course after that the COVID pandemic broke out, and this showed us that and here we were forced to deal with the COVID pandemic on 2 levels: on the short term, which includes recommendations and recommendations that alleviate the short-term effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, and a number of papers were produced, and some more will be issued in the future as well that conclusively summarize everything that they have our working group has worked on. And so some of these recommendations, for example, have to do with supply resources, in addition to the supply and demand aspect. If you remember, last March, when the COVID-19 pandemic was at its harshest, there were a number of financial fears, and many countries had difficulties with regards to funding, and this showed us truly how important it is to have an ease in funding, and that B20 countries must ensure, and the G20 countries must ensure, that funding can be sent in a non-complicated manner. Another recommendation had to do with ensuring that small and medium-sized enterprises were supported, in addition to having support for individuals, so that the economic wheel, so to speak, does not stop, and so it continues to move regardless of a pandemic existing or not. And so what's special really is that if you look at the work that the different groups have done with regards to digitization and trade, they all were collected together at the B20 level, and of course after that they were then displayed to the G20. And if we take a look at some of these recommendations, we can see really how much we take pride in the recommendations that we issue. We worked extremely quickly, in an extremely efficient manner, regardless of the harshness of the pandemic. Now, if we take a look at the long-term effects, we have 4 recommendations. We at the Finance and Infrastructure team have 4 long-term recommendations. Of course, these have to do with increasing funding for sustainable achievement goals. Number 2, empowering sustainable development with regards to environmental governance and the governance of companies. Number 3, the acceleration of technology in the financial sector. And number 4, of course, increasing the role of the financial sector in alleviating organizational risks. If we take a look at these recommendations, we see that they are all in sync, and they are all harmonious. And if these 4 recommendations are all approved, then we can see truly how they can lead to the solving of the issues that the COVID-19 pandemic or other similar pandemics could result in the future. And so this was truly a unprecedented year. We did hope that we could actually meet and see each other in person, but the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia's presidency of the G20 and B20 has truly provided us with great confidence in order to overcome the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020. Thank you. I would like to go back now to Mr. Abdul Wahab Sadoun. Let's take a look at the methodology and how. Could you please tell us about some of the challenges that you faced within this context? The pandemic and its effect on business, maybe this is one of the challenges that has truly reflected on the business models. And previously, all working teams meetings were conferences or summits that were honorary in a sense, but now since we and they were physical, of course, and now we can and now of course it is different. We have virtual meetings instead of physical meetings. Let's take a look at some of the stages of elaborating the policy recommendations proposed by the B20 group. There is great coordination between the member countries, of course, and during this past period we have seen how issues were prioritized, such as international trade, for example, in addition to invigorating or the international trade, in addition to solving issues between different organizations. We can take a look also at the energy issue, which is considered a key issue. And today, after we saw the effects of this pandemic, we have seen how the medical sector and medical business sector has suffered as well. And this is something that the business sector truly takes into great consideration, and that is very important to release the shackles, so to speak, because this will result in positive economic effects. In addition, one of the challenges was the transformation towards digital economy, and maybe this was considered one of the opportunities that show us how important it is to accelerate the steps taken in order to implement the prerequisites of digital economy. There are also a number of issues that come with it, such as cybersecurity, and this was one of the recommendations that the working teams have worked on and have worked on issuing recommendations for. Now, we all know that there are many challenges, and these challenges are continuous, but the working teams have truly worked very seriously to reach agreements, and this is something that I would like to express my great appreciation for. The working teams, of course, different countries have different priorities, but of course there were some issues, but thankfully we were able to reach agreements with regards to all of our issues, and this agreement was unanimous, of course, between all of the working members, all of the working teams, rather. This truly reflects the significant, effective leadership of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia within the B20 and G20. And I would just like to shed some light on that. This is truly considered the result of hard work and efforts that started even before December of 2019. The colleagues, led of course by Mr. Yusuf, had played effective roles in previous meetings and summits, which provided them with great experience to lead the B20 group. We have benefited greatly from past participations in past summits, and so our work was based on a number of levels. At the beginning, we issued polls and studies that resulted in another paper that was discussed in Riyadh in the middle of January, and we had more than 700 participants, more than 55% of which were from countries outside of the MENA region, Middle East and North Africa region. The second phase, I will explain it simply. The second theme, of course, we adopted the methodology of conference calls in order to achieve, in order to realize the recommendations, and of course the final phase currently, which is where we look forward towards the G20 summit in late November, and the concluding summary that will be issued as well. Ms. Rania, I will ask you quickly, please, about what are the priorities of the Women in Business Council, and could you elaborate on your working mechanism, please? Of course, the working mechanism of the Council, as Dr. Abdul Wahab previously mentioned, we started preparing at a very early stage. We studied all of the different recommendations that were produced in past summits, whether these are B20 or G20 recommendations, which all include, of course, increasing the rate of participation of women in all sectors, of course. After that, we issued a study and a poll that addressed the priorities that the Women in Business Council should address. Of course, these we had a number of physical meetings, and then after that, after the COVID outbreak, of course, we had teleconferences and virtual meetings. We take into great consideration empowering women, having equality, increasing the leading roles of women in the business sector, in addition to having more opportunities for women in entrepreneurship, in addition to having more effective cooperation between different stakeholders. So the recommendations that we work on, I will simply mention them quickly. We would like to invite the G20 member states to provide an inclusive environment, provide equal pay for women, in addition to having flexibility in work. We also ask we at the Women in Business Council would like to have an analysis of the different equality policies that are taken in different G20 countries, and that these policies should be amended in order to ensure the protection of women's rights and having equal opportunities. In addition, with regards to future employment in the STEM fields, which are science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, currently even though there are a growing number of graduates in the STEM fields, unfortunately they only represent less than 20% of overall roles in sectors such as artificial intelligence, big data, and among others. And so we would like to have a roadmap in order to ensure that women have a higher rate of participation in this STEM sector. Additionally, I would like to add that we have seen that we need many women scientists, women chemists, and other specialists in the medical field, especially since more than 70% or around 70% of overall participants in the medical field are women. So this is another matter. Additionally, there must be a clear and concise matter that addresses women's objectives and priorities, where the B20 and G20 groups continuously issue different plans for having equal opportunities for women in leadership roles. Additionally, in the G20, we would like to look at the support of small and medium-sized enterprises and women entrepreneurs, in addition to finding the best ways for the business sector to support the Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you, Mr. Rayyan. Before the break, I would just like to ask you, I did not ask you about the business, did not ask you about the finance and infrastructure team, and could you please elaborate a little bit more about the general traits of the recommendations that the team has issued? Of course, I did address some of the recommendations previously or earlier, but the working team consists of a president, a vice president, and the other members, of course. The presidents of the different teams or the team leaders are represented or represent global companies in the funding sector and the infrastructure sector, and we were keen on having a high representation percentage of Saudis and women within our working teams, and we have been successful in that, thankfully. The priorities, of course, as I said, the priorities were affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, but there are also long-term priorities that have to do with funding infrastructure, sustainable development, the role of technology and data in the finance sector, and last but not least, increasing the role of the financial sector. If we take a look at these pillars, maybe some of them have been addressed in the past, but there's something that we focused on this year. The thing that we focused on this year is sustainability. In past B20 and G20 occasions, they focused more on infrastructure and easing of funding in general, but we this year we focused on the sustainability of infrastructure, the sustainability of funding infrastructure, and the sustainability of funding. And how, in addition to investing in the financial sector, and in the past few years, a working group has issued a paper that has all companies release a sustainability report starting with next year. And this is something that we take into great consideration, and it is something very important to us. Thank you. Thank you all. We shall now watch a short video and return to discuss our third theme. Welcome back. After this short break, we will now finish up and address the third theme, which has to do with looking beyond 2020 and the sustainability of the participation of the Saudi business sector in shaping the international agenda. We shall start with Mr. Yusuf Al-Banayan. What is your sustainable vision for the activities and initiatives of the Saudi Business Group after the Kingdom's presidency of the G20? Will there be a follow-up to its implementation in future G20 sessions? No doubt. There is no doubt. And my answer will be quick so that we can allow more time for questions and answers. So I can summarize it in three main points. Of course, we work with the Saudi Chamber of Commerce in addition to other organizations in order to create a body that effectively cooperates with the B20 group in the future, especially. Yes, and so the second point is that we must work in close coordination with our colleagues in Italy, especially since next year's meeting will be in Italy, and so there must be clear coordination and cooperation with them because we represent businessmen and women at the global level, and so we aim to have Saudi Arabia's leadership have a long-lasting effect, not only this year, but also during future years as well. The third point is working with government entities within the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and so that businessmen and women can play a larger role in coordinating with the G20 teams. Because the G20, of course, as we all know, does not only affect global systems, but we all know how important the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is and how vital of a player it is. And so that is why it is very important for us to have a leading role in future policies. Could you please evaluate the interaction and participation of the Saudi business sector with the B20 Group? Mr. Yusuf, can you explain to us how we could support the Saudi business sector in order to enhance its role and participation in this summit? The participation of businessmen and women, of Saudi businessmen and women, in coordinates with the businessmen and women around the world was very impressive. And the participation of the B20 group in Saudi Arabia during the past 10 years was not as effective as it is today, and so it is important for us, and we see it this year. We have a great participation rate. We have a executive committee. We have a large number of Saudi businessmen and women that play leading roles. More than we have a large task force. This task force consists of around 43%, or around 43% of the members of this task force are women, which we take great pride in. And in reality, after our nomination process was closed, and we are still continuing to receive applications for participation from different businessmen and women, this will play a great role in reflecting the leading role that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia plays, of course, in future years, whether in 2021 and beyond. Thank you, Mr. Yusuf. To what extent do the international recommendations and legislations positively affect the Saudi business sector? There is no doubt that the international recommendations and legislations positively affect the Saudi business sector, whether they come from the World Trade Organization, the World Bank or others, they all have a effect here locally within the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, considering that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is a part of the G20 group. And so through our active participation, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia will play a leading role in affecting and will play a leading role in different policies. Thank you. And before we start with questions, we shall watch another short film and return after.
حياكم الله من جديد في هذا الجزء الأخير من حلقتنا لهذه الليلة. العديد من الأسئلة.
Welcome back to the final part of our meeting here. We have received a large number of questions from the audience and the press, and we shall start to answer them quickly. Let's start with Dr. Abdul Wahab Al-Sadoun. The question is, thank you for the question. We have 7 working groups in addition to a Women in Business Council, and all of these groups have produced 3 or 4 main recommendations. The overall number of recommendations is around 28 recommendations, and we have worked on distributing them and categorizing them in accordance to the 3 main goals that the G20 has identified. And so the quantity is not as important as the content of the recommendations, and we at the working teams have worked extremely hard to realize and produce applicable, realistic policies. Some policies were negated due to the challenges with regards to applying them in the real world context. And so within this context, the issues that will be presented to the G20 and the leadership here in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia are 28 recommendations that focus on these 7 main working teams and their respective sectors, in addition to the Women in Business Council. Ms. Rania, we have a question. What does the Women in Business Council focus on, and what events have they participated in? We have worked not only with the working teams within the B20, but we have also worked on other communication teams under the G20 umbrella. We worked together with the N20 in addition to the W20, which is the Women 20, and we have worked together on producing different statements that specifically address the COVID pandemic and its effects on business, and specifically women in business. And so we have a number of joint statements with different working teams. We also have a number of conferences that introduce the Women in Business Council and its role it plays. We have found that most of the roads are crossroads, so to speak, whether we are talking about employment or career advancement or other factors, and so it is very important. So this is some of the work we have done with the N20 and W20. Thank you. We shall continue with more questions quickly. We have around 9 minutes left. I will ask Mr. Rayyan. What does the B20 need to reinvigorate the global economy back to growth, and what has the B20 done to achieve that? Of course, the infrastructure and funding team, finance and infrastructure team has done leaps and bounds with regards to producing reports. We have learned that we cannot wait until the end of the year in order to issue a statement. The COVID-19 outbreak, especially in March, required us to work extremely quickly and in an extremely efficient manner, which in turn we of course issued a statement immediately with the recommendations that we have found. And we found that many of the recommendations were applied, and we can see its effect today in the global economy. There is a lot of liquefaction that has happened. In addition, I would also like to address resilience quickly, how we can overcome any pandemic or any risk that whether it is a health risk or another type of risk, such as an environmental risk, for example. This is part of the priorities that we have recommended at the Finance and Infrastructure Working Group. There are a number of questions that we have received to Mr. Yusuf Al-Banyan. The first question is, what is the percentage of women that contribute towards the B20 group, and what roles do they play? I think Ms. Rania could be more capable of answering this question than me. Of course, the participation rate of women in our groups is more than 40%, and in addition, there is a Women in Business Council that has a number of key members such as Dr. Dakhil and Ms. Lubna, who all have leading roles in the world of trade. There are also co-chairs. We have a high number of women who work as co-chairs with all of the working teams. Mr. Yusuf, how does the B20 develop policies, and to what extent do the B20's recommendations affect the leaders of the G20 countries? Of course, there is no doubt that we have thankfully noticed that the recommendations that we sent to the leaders of the G20 groups and the recommendations that we sent in March, they adopted more than 70% of the recommendations that the B20 group has produced. But the goal is to have a sustainability in these recommendations. And to have a continuous support of these recommendations. Let's continue with more questions. To what extent has the Kingdom become active and effective in the B20 group, and what percentage of Saudis contribute toward the group's work? Of course, this year is an unprecedented year. Regardless of the COVID-19 challenges and the challenges that the world's economy faces, we have nonetheless seen the exceptional role that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has played. This is the first time that we have seen such excellent presidency of the G20 group. There was a report that was produced in July that had to do specifically with the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic and the recommended policies and procedures in order to alleviate the effects. And hopefully in October there will be more policies, recommendations and suggestions that will be presented to the leadership. We take great pride in our Women in Business Council. We also take, and we in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, we consider this a very special year. And all of the numbers that Dr. Abdul Wahab As-Sadoun has mentioned, compared to the last 10 years since the B20 group was founded, we have found that the challenge in future years will be to maintain the high level of productivity that we have witnessed, and this is due to all of the hard work that everyone has worked on, whether in the G20 Secretariat or other entities as well. Sir, how can you ensure that everything that you have worked on will continue in the future? We will work together as one team with the Executive Committee and the decision makers in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, with the businessmen and women. As Ms. Rania has mentioned, we have a number of exceptional people such as Mr. Rayyan, Ms. Lubna, and other colleagues as well. In addition to Dr. Nasser al-Nasser, we have some of the most effective leaders in the world that lead our teams. And so, of course, in addition to our colleagues at the Chamber of Commerce, and we will work together with them to find a specific mechanism that ensures the continuity of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia's leading role in future summits. Dr. Abdul Wahab, I will ask you about the Sherpa. Many people have asked about the role of the Sherpa, and so what exactly does a Sherpa do? Thank you. The Sherpa is the guide that, as you know, the Sherpas are guides that lead mountainous expeditions in the Himalaya region, and this name has inspired the role that the Sherpa plays here, and it has been adopted in the English language. The Sherpa, within our context, of course, is considered a guide to tell the team how to reach the top and to help the team how to reach the top. And I think that this is the I don't know if there is a specific equivalent of that word in the Arabic language, but I hope that I have answered the question. Mr. Rayyan, I would like to ask you, there are many people who have asked and said that you know that more than 80% of the workers in the world work in small and medium-sized enterprises, and there is no doubt that said enterprises have been greatly affected by the COVID pandemic. What can the B20 Group do to ensure small and medium enterprises continuity? Our colleague mentioned this before. There are two main pillars that we must focus on, and that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia's presidency is very interested in, which is, of course, focusing on small and medium-sized enterprises, and number two, SPGs, which are the sustainable goals issued by the United Nations. We will see the recommendations produced. They have a direct relationship to small and medium-sized enterprises. And if we talk about this effect, if we talk about this COVID-19 pandemic, and we have seen the key role that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has played. We have seen how the different G20 countries have applied their recommendations, and I believe that what has been approved of is proof of how important small and medium-sized enterprises are viewed, and I believe that in the future we will see a even deeper emphasis on small and medium-sized enterprises. Thank you very much. I would like to conclude with Mr. Yusuf with a final question. The World Trade Organization, the OECD, has